Hello and welcome to episode 16 of Cold Case Christmas. In this episode, we are investigating the brutal double homicide of a loving wedded couple, devoted to their church, both 74 years of age, slain in the most horrific of ways. The FBI have commented that this case is among the 1% of most complex cases that they've ever had to investigate. This is the bizarre murders of Bill and Peggy Stephenson. It was May 29th, 2011, in Florence in Kentucky. Bill and Peggy Stephenson had not turned up for church, and Bill had not turned up for his truckers ministry that he'd been doing for many years. It was a place where people on the road could gather and pray. Bill and Peggy led very quiet lives, but in their own way very impactful in their local community. Daughter Beth was very concerned when she realised that Bill and Peggy were potentially missing. However, she couldn't have imagined what they would find when they went to investigate what had happened to Bill and Peggy. When detectives entered the scene in the couple's condo, they found the most horrific, bizarre scene. Both Bill and Peggy had been bludgeoned with a blunt force implement and stabbed multiple times with a sharp force weapon. They were found in different rooms, and whoever had killed them had staged the most bizarre scene that investigators had ever witnessed. Detective Coy Cox, who's headed the investigation since day one, said that investigators were guarded and careful about the details that are being released about this crime because it was so bizarre that only the killer would know exactly what went down that day. The bodies had been staged and posed. Items inside the house had been moved around. There was some family photos that were kind of put in bizarre places. And there wasn't one room in the house that wasn't staged. It was clear that whoever had murdered Bill and Peggy had spent hours at that scene doing the most bizarre things. Was it a ritual? Was it just the mind of a Looney Tune? Was it done to send a message? Or was it done to throw detectives off the scent of the real killer? We don't know, because the killer has never been caught. That said, over the years, bits and pieces of information about this crime scene have come out from investigators. Little bits and pieces, not specific details, but enough to give us an understanding of just how bizarre it was. Detectives know that the murders occurred sometime between 1 and 4 a.m. on May 29th, 2011. They do know the precise time of death of one of the couple due to a medical device implanted in one of them. There was no sign of forced entry, which most likely means that Bill and Peggy knew whoever it was that murdered them. They lived in a condo complex and they had to buzz in any visitors. It was a very safe place. And the neighbours didn't hear anything. It wasn't like there'd been a commotion, a fight, a struggle to get in, or Bill and Peggy trying to keep someone out. No, this was a condominium complex. Neighbours lived quite close, and they heard nothing out of the ordinary. The killer, or killers, we don't know how many people are involved, seemed comfortable in that environment to spend hours in that condo. We know that at least one of the victims had inflicted on them post-mortem injuries, so injuries sustained after their death. There's also a message left by the killer or killers that Detective Cox said he wasn't going to share those details. Again, that's something only the killer would have intimate knowledge of. Detective Cox has said that the investigation is active, it's not cold, but there's no signs of an arrest on the horizon anytime soon. Cox said that over the years, his team have visited more than a dozen states, working on leads and following up on tips. Because Bill had so much contact with the trucking community, passing through towns, stopping to, gather and pray at his trucker's ministry, a number of tips have been related to people living hundreds of miles away. One of the people that has interested social media and perhaps investigators as well is Bill and Peggy's nephew. Some people assumed that the killer had been caught when one of the Stephensons' nephews was arrested in connection with another murder. Charles, known as Stevie Stephenson, was convicted in 2012 of beating 67-year-old Lee Jennings in Indiana to death with a skillet and pepper grinder. He was sentenced in 2013 to life in prison without parole. And it's understandable Stevie Stephenson would be considered a suspect. Bludgeoned one older person to death. Well, why not his uncle and auntie? It's likely that Bill and Peggy knew their killer. But it wasn't Stevie Stephenson who did it, because they have his DNA on file, and DNA scattered all over that crime scene didn't match his. Yeah, that's right. Detectives have a full genetic profile of the killer, and they're still none the wiser. They're also none the wiser about the motive, because the scene was so bizarre. It could lead investigators down many theoretical pathways. Things that home invaders, sometimes who commit murder, are likely to rob were left untouched. And the arrangement of the family photos in the condo seemed to suggest that the killer liked certain people in the family and not others. Again, it leads us to believe that the killer knew the family, Bill and Peggy, very well. Who would do that to Bill and Peggy? They had no enemies that we know about. The obvious question for anybody who follows true crime is that there's DNA. So have investigators tried the somewhat new approach to solving murders and missing persons cases, that of investigative genetic genealogy, where they get a DNA profile, different type of DNA profile that is used for things like paternity testing or matching one DNA sample against another. SMP testing tests a sample of DNA against many possible relatives in order for investigators to try to piece together a family tree that may well lead them to the killer. There's been quite a number of cases now solved because of investigative genetic genealogy. However, Cox said the DNA is not suitable for genealogy or phenotyping at this time. We hope in future that changes. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know why it's not suitable. Perhaps it's because it's a mixed sample, that there's more than one profile within whatever DNA they've collected. I think it's likely to be that, but that's just my assumption at this time. One well-known double homicide has been potentially linked to the bizarre murders of Bill and Peggy Stephenson, and that is the murders of 13-year-old Abby Williams and 14-year-old Liberty German in Delphi, Indiana. That's roughly 200 miles away from Florence, Kentucky. Investigator Coy Cox told the media earlier this year that his team is currently investigating whether the deaths of Bill and Peggy could be linked to the murders of Libby and Abby. Like the Stephensons, the girls' bodies were found posed and the scene thought to have been staged. However, because we don't know about the precise nature of Bill and Peggy's injuries, I can't say whether I believe that there's a link in some way. Very different victims, two children, best friends, just going for a walk on Monon High Bridge, and then a 74-year-old couple 200 miles away. I don't know whether anybody in the families knew each other. I've no idea. I don't know. But if they've got DNA from the Stephenson household and they believe that's the killer, well, they've got a number of DNA profiles now for suspects and of Richard Allen, who is accused, currently sitting in prison, waiting trial for the murders of Libby and Abby. So will it prove fruitful? I've no idea. Their daughter Beth said that she does believe the killer will be caught. She said, "I've every faith this will be resolved. I have every faith in our detectives to find the person responsible. They are determined to solve this, and I think it will be solved. We've had our hopes up before and nothing has come out of it, but we've just got to keep our hope up. This lead," so the link to Delphi, "will lead to something." Speaking directly to the killer, she said, "If they're alive still, they will be found out. They will be found. I would ask them to do the right thing and turn themselves in before that happens. And if anybody out there knows something, anything, please come forward. The detectives will determine whether it's anything or not." She went on to say, "There's times I believe it was random, and there's times I believe it's possible it's somebody they knew. My feelings change about it every once in a while, and just the way the crime scene was, I mean, we don't know a whole lot about it, but just the way it was set up and stuff, then it makes me believe it has to be someone they knew." Over the years, Beth has feared for her own life and that of her family members. She still refuses to go outside at night alone and has even kept the blinds drawn on the front windows of her home 24/7 until very recently. "It never goes away," she said, about the paranoia and fear. "I still wonder, to this very day, is the person still out there? Are they local or are they not? I've definitely changed the way I do things because of it. I just don't go out at night by myself, and especially in the beginning, I didn't really go anywhere. But there is a $50,000 reward for information that would lead to an arrest in this case. And anybody with information about the murders of Bill and Peggy Stephenson is urged to call the Boone County Sheriff's Office at 859-334-2175. Cox has also set up an email address, which is stephensontip@boonecounty, all one word, ky.org. What do you think about this case? Do you think it's linked to the Delphi murders? Do you think it's just one of those bizarre cases that will never be solved? I think it will, but the jury's out as to whether there's any link at all to the Delphi murders. But I'll see you in the next episode of Cold Case Christmas. Bye, guys.